Let's record. It's time to go. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Cozy Corner of Cinema. This is episode number 136, being recorded on Monday, November 4th, 2024 at 6:24 p.m. Well, that's what my telephone says. My laptop says 6:22 p.m., so we'll meet in the middle and say 6:23 to play it safe. Daylight savings has hit. I hope you all have been adjusting accordingly. It can take a little bit of time to get back into the flow of things. We have gone back an hour. We have gained an hour of sleep. We have gained an hour of opportunity. We have gained an hour of our lives that we can use however which way we see fit. The sun goes down earlier, and that brings us right into the coziest time of the year. When it gets colder out, the sun is down earlier, and that means to stay inside. Once that sun is down, I am not going anywhere, man. There's no way I'm going anywhere. And if I am going to go out, there better be a good reason behind it, man. You know, people be texting you, they're talking about, hey, let's go here, let's do this. Oh man, it's going to be great. We're going to go out, we're going to do it. It's like, no way, man. It's just not going to happen. Your life is your own. You really got to be at the forefront of it and really lead it in the direction that you see fit. There's just no chance going to be going out there and just a meandering, socializing nonsense. It's just not going to happen, man. There's no way. Unless something productive happening, unless you're working on a project, you're actually gaining something out of the experience instead of just, hey, how's it going? Oh, it's going good. It's not going to happen, man. Life's too short for that. There's just far too much to do. There's far too many films to watch, far too much to read and write. This is never going to happen. But we get into the this wonderful, cozy time of the year. And we fall asleep to Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell. That's just totally great. Suspense, beautiful radio dramas. It was great listening to The Hitchhiker by Orson Welles. I think originally written, I think, in 1941. Maybe it may have even been recorded. I'm not sure. But I know it was rebroadcast in 1942 with Orson Welles doing the narration, and what a truly suspenseful story. And it's just great to listen to with, the chill in the air. You can actually get under the covers and really kind of, especially if you don't got to be up early the next day, man, well, that's really great. You can just stay up and get your work done, you go to bed and enjoy your time sleeping in, or maybe you're somebody who gets up early in the morning, just knowing that your life is at your own pace and you got to take it that way. Really, really cool. It's really good stuff, man. And it's definitely getting a little bit chilly in here, for sure. That's going to make us want to layer up. And like I said, get under the blankets and just, at the end of the night, maybe you work all day, or maybe it's a Friday or something, and you get under the blanket, you put on a film, you're reading some wonderful literature. It's just, oh my gosh, man, there's nothing like it. It's experiences like those that really kind of make up just some of the great underappreciated moments throughout life. You never really know when you're in a good moment. When you reminisce and people talk about, oh, back then, when I was young, I did this, I did that. I'd probably take a good guess that maybe you didn't realize how well you had it in the moment, because these are the memories that you make, and these are the memories that you are fond of and look back on. So although I may sit here and I may say that I'm not going to go out and socialize and do any of that nonsense, if that's what makes you happy, is going out on a night like this and doing whatever it is you got to do, then you should, and if that's just going to make you happy, then by all means do it. It's just really great. I was looking up. I got a notification, or actually I was looking up on social media, which I try not to really use, but the few times that I'm on there, I see Mubi was posting about their new podcast episode that came out on Halloween with a wonderful interview and somewhat of an analysis in a way of Mr. Kyle Edward Ball. His 2023, I know it says 2022, but I saw it last year. Skinamarink, which I have now officially confirmed. I have been calling it wrong the entire time. I've been calling it Skinamarink. I don't know what it means, but by gosh. Anyways, It was a wonderful episode, and I think the Mubi Podcast is not. People really gotta get on that, man. That's a really, really great podcast. They like TCM. They do seasons, or I guess, well, actually, a lot of podcasts like that, film podcasts, kind of focus on one thing. But this past season was all about haunted houses, haunted house films. I didn't listen to all of them, but I saw this one got posted, and I wanted to listen to it. It had a really interesting look at the film itself and the state that the film was released in. How it played at, I don't remember the name of the film festival. It was a big film festival, I think Fantasia maybe, and it got a lot of talk. People were talking about it. It gets leaked online, and because of that, it starts to gain a whole new sort of awareness on social media and on various social media platforms, and gets all this talk, and it gets a big release and all that, and it's a very, very really just kind of inspirational look into the film, into Kyle Edward Ball's journey. He talks about he had made his initial film, and it didn't come out well. He says it didn't come out well. I forgot what the name of it was because it's not listed online. But he made it. I don't even know if he ever released it or not. And he knew he put all this work into it, and he's just like, man, I don't know about this. So just on a whim, he makes this short, this film Heck, which I guess it was used to kind of garner interest in Skinamarink. I've seen a little bit of that. I haven't seen all of it, but from there, it ends up becoming kind of a jumping off point to make this feature film, and then it gets word of mouth. People are talking about it. People have divisive opinions on it, but it gets passed around, and it's an incredibly inspirational story, especially now. We're in an age where anybody can make their own kind of, everybody's got a telephone, everybody's got a camera on their phone. It's really just all about going out there and doing your own unique spin on it. And this podcast talks about the contemporary age of analog horror, online sort of YouTube videos and short films, and it's all just incredibly fascinating. I find, contemporary horror is something that I find myself at a distance at. I don't really see very many contemporary horror films that I really kind of get something out of. I like to see a lot of everything. So I like to see a lot of any kind of genre. And there are plenty of great ones, undoubtedly, but I do feel like they are sparsely released. So rarely am I as enthusiastic as I perhaps still am about Skinamarink. I think it's just a wonderful, incredibly unnerving, incredibly disturbing and creepy film. I'm not particularly fond of loud noises and just abrasive kind of blood and guts, and that there's a time and a place for that, but that's really just kind of not my bag. I'm a bit more into like a quieter, much slower sort of film like this, and not to say that it doesn't have its narrative issues. Of course it does. I think it has narrative and filmmaking issues. But I think what I come back to is what I come back to when I initially saw it, is that I kind of put it on a higher sort of plane if a film can truly get under my skin and creep me out. I was fortunate enough to see this theatrically and just had a really wonderful experience, just being in a black theater, just in a pitch black theater, and just being completely succumbed to the vortex that is this film. I just really love this film. It's a film that I even thought about rewatching on Halloween because I listened to that episode, but ultimately I didn't. I wanted to get that last episode of Peephole Pictures out, and then I don't even know what I watched after the fact. I think I watched that bizarre film that was in the Vinegar Syndrome box set, the Cannibal Isle. What the hell was it called? It was called, The Rare Blue Apes of Cannibal Isle. What a bizarre film that was. But I recommend, even if you're not particularly a fan of the film, I think the podcast itself is so well put together. I was really enjoying listening to a lot of TCM's seasonal podcasts they were doing. The one they did on Bonfire of the Vanities, based off the book, which I'm blanking on the name of, The Devil's Candy, I think it was called. Um, it was called The Devil's something. If I could find it here. It was The Devil's Candy by Julie Salomon. And it was a great season looking at the incredibly troubled pre and post production and filming of the controversial Bonfire of the Vanities book the film directed by Brian De Palma, which is one of the few De Palmas I have not seen, but it'd be interesting to watch that out of purely just contextual sake for the season and just all the trouble that the production went through and becoming a film that I think people forget that De Palma directed. It's not one that's usually brought up in his filmography, let alone as one of his strongest ones. But they also had another terrific season. They've had a couple seasons. They had another one on the life of Peter Bogdanovich. This was right before he had passed away. So it goes through his upbringing, his love of classic Hollywood, him being part of the new age of Hollywood, but being more tied into the classic age, being incredibly fond of filmmakers like John Ford, Howard Hawks, Alfred Hitchcock, and making his own kind of unique sort of really just well-written character films. And then, of course, into the Dorothy Stratton era and into the contemporary era. And actually, I just recently watched a enjoyable documentary specifically about the film that I am blanking on the name of, but it was about, the name of the documentary was One Day Since Yesterday, Peter Bogdanovich and the Lost American Film. And the film that it primarily focused on was They All Laughed, which was significant in many ways, but primarily because of the relationship that Peter Bogdanovich and Dorothy Stratton had, and sort of what happened after the filming of that. The tragic story of Dorothy Stratton made into a film by Bob Fosse called Star 80, which is very good. But it's a well done documentary. Anyways, I'm going off topic here. But anyways, with that Mubi Haunted Houses season, I also listened to the episode about one of my favorite films, which is Hausu. I guess it's just called House, but there's so many films called House that it's easier just to call it Hausu, which is the original name. It's a Japanese film from 1977, directed by Nobuhiko Obayashi. And for any of you who have that Criterion Blu-ray or have that Criterion DVD, either or, I highly recommend you listen to that interview with his daughter on there. It's about an hour or so. But it goes into, and the podcast episode repeats a lot of the same points that she brings up in that documentary, but in that interview. But that interview stretches it out and puts more depth into these stories. But about the pre-production and release of the very notorious, just really wild film Hausu. It goes into a lot of the themes, a lot of the ideas that Obayashi's daughter had in terms of implementing a lot of her ideas in the film, and the kind of reaction that it really brought out. I think there's a level of darkness in the film. I mean, it's very intentionally comedic. It's very intentionally bizarre and farcical and just really extravagant, over-the-top sequences. But I think there is a true sinister darkness to it at play with some of the imagery and just some of the location of it. Very, very dreamlike. But the reaction that film initially garnered from a lot of children in Japan, this being played out as something like a fairy tale in a way of just a really kind of imaginative, wild sort of film. And then, into the career that Obayashi would have, this is the only film I've seen. I do own Beijing Watermelon. Sorry, my throat's kind of dry right now. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I can hear it or not. I have this water right here. I'm trying not to sound too dry. But an interesting filmmaker. Oh, you know what? Actually, I've actually also seen His Motorbike, Her Island from 1986, which is a very interesting film. I'm looking here, seeing if I've seen anything else, but how much he had wanted to direct Hausu, and how eager and dedicated he was until finally he got his shot and it launched his whole career. Yeah, I think it's just that. Yeah, those two. His Motorbike, Her Island is the only other of his films I've seen. And what I'm talking about with Kyle Edward Ball is that it's not guaranteed. But if you're not going to put yourself out there, you're not going to put in the time and effort and work, then you'll never know if you could, be in the position that you want to be in. But House as well is a very excellent film. It's a great film to watch with people, especially people who haven't seen it before. I think there's a real heart to it, and I think there's a lot more going on with the film than just really kind of extravagant, bizarre, dark imagery. There's a lot of frightening sequences, but there's a lot of heart in the backstory of the grandmother. Which I should also say that with Mubi, that they are filled with spoilers. So if you haven't, I don't think it's going to be detrimental if you listen to it and you haven't seen it. But I do think that some of the fun is actually discovering these on your own and kind of discovering the unraveling of it all. But also the significance of, like, the white cat in the film. It's a brilliant film. It's just one of my favorite films. I think it's an incredibly touching film, an incredibly strange and bizarre and one of a kind film. I think part of that, a lot of the special effects are very rudimentary and can be intentionally sort of off at times, but I think that adds another layer to it, more so than just a crazy haunted house movie. Because there is that, but there is a lot more going on here. But I think in the time of because I think this film, I don't know if it was lost for a while or if it was just widely unavailable, but I remember when that Criterion DVD came out, whatever year that was, and just hearing this gradual buzz being brought up over it, and I think that's kind of one of the seminal films to really kind of get a new life on home video, at least in the 21st century, where people are now, it's been out for a while, so you can, it's not as if it's a recent sort of reevaluation, but people are now seeing this sort of rediscovery. I would say maybe even come and see to a certain extent, because I've heard so many people talk about it more since maybe 5 or 6 years ago, even maybe before the Criterion release. But I remember a decade ago hearing about that film, and no one was talking about it. I hadn't even seen it then, so I was only vaguely familiar with it. I just knew it was this really incredible war film, and then now I've seen it mentioned so much that it has kind of garnered a whole new life of its own. But yeah, take a listen to that Mubi podcast. It's real cool, man. They had another season about the different cinemas in the world and their significance. Their significances. They talked about, of course, the Cinémathèque Française in the middle of the student protests in 1968. And that's all great. Also envisioned, or also kind of brought to life, and The Dreamers from 2003 from Bernardo Bertolucci. There's that cinema plays a part in the story in that kind of at that time period. But good stuff. It's all good stuff here. I think I'm almost done with this water here. I had a can of seltzer water here. It's very delicious, but gosh, throat feels drier than sandpaper. Let's talk about some literature. Let's talk about this book from let me get the copyright on this. Written by Jon Lewis, copyright 2000, Hollywood versus Hardcore, which I've not finished reading yet, but it's a wonderful look into the ongoing from the Hays Code to the mid-1970s of Hollywood and the censors, whether that being the Hays Code, whether that being in the eventual sort of shrinking or dissolving of that into the mid-1950s into the 1960s, when we're getting a lot of international films which didn't have to abide by said code, but did have trouble being imported into America. But ultimately, a lot of international auteurs who were releasing far headier films, far more intellectual films than some of the American studio films that were coming out at the time, and the eventual sort of push into the new American cinema of the late 1960s or into the early 1970s, which has been written about many, many times. And the book goes into that too. But the book also goes into the beginnings of hardcore adult films being a significant moneymaker, including, in 1972 when you have The Godfather and Deep Throat being incredibly successful, financially successful films. But we have one big studio film with a notoriously troubled production, which is nothing new for Francis Coppola. And on the other hand, whoops, sorry, I had to pause briefly there, so there might be a hiccup in the audio. But compared to a film like Deep Throat, which is far lower budgeted, no big stars, shot fairly quickly, and it being a monstrous financial success, and especially if we're not adjusting for inflation, when film tickets were far cheaper and there were more showtimes, so you could have films running basically around the clock, essentially, and sort of the new sort of era that films were going in were, I think, not just content wise, but I think we were just getting very a film like The Godfather, a very mature, very adult film in a way where, by veering away from the kind of bloated, hugely, just pouring money in studio films of the previous 20 years, really, that we're just not doing anything. We're either huge financial failures, or we're, just not doing the business that they had intended or they had thought, and the gradual shift to more filmmaker driven films. It's interesting. I forgot what studio it was. I apologize. I'm blanking on it. But one of the studios who, when Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up was becoming such an international success, which is a brilliant experimental film. Well, partly experimental narrative at times. At times non-linear narrative. Film for adults, truly a film that you really got to kind of sit down, and the film's not going to hold your hand, but it was a huge success. And then they give him this money, they give him a picture deal to do whatever, another film that he wants, and then he chooses to do Zabriskie Point, which is a controversial film. It's very critical of the American government, very critical of what was going on at the time in America. And the book talks about a lot of the production issues, a lot of the narrative issues, trying to, the actors having to get certain actors for the films. I say narrative in terms of, it's Zabriskie Point. It falls in line with a lot of some of Antonioni's later work around that time. Ironically enough, Zabriskie Point is perhaps my least favorite of his work, but I find it a very fascinating film as well. It's actually his follow-up, The Passenger, with Jack Nicholson, and I think that's Maria Schneider is in the film, which I find far more engaging and far more intellectual. As I think Zabriskie Point's a fascinating film, but I find what Antonioni is saying to be very superficial and very shallow, especially for somebody who I think is an incredibly intellectual filmmaker. That it often, when I watch that film, it often feels diluted in terms of what he's trying to say. It feels very simple and not much room for interpretation, which is what I think Antonioni is so good at. Are these themes, and especially his characters as well. But I think The Passenger sort of has a lot of the more nonlinear, slower filmmaking that Zabriskie Point has, but I think excels far and wide. And I don't know if I said the year, it's 1975. I don't know if I said 1972 by accident, but The Passenger is a wonderful film. It's a wonderful film for adults. Truly a film that, Joe Schmo is not going to sit there and watch it. They're going to be on the telephone. They're going to be on social media, and that's fine. But these are just not the people whom you want to be watching films with. At least not this kind of film with. They're not going to get much out of it, and there's not going to be much room for discussion. It's going to just be very superficial. But no, with that said, it's a wonderful book so far. I'm really enjoying it. There's a whole section about the Hays Code in Hollywood, about later on about the blacklisting in Hollywood, a lot of filmmakers being blacklisted, and the eventual disintegration of that into all these studios being at sort of a standstill, not any real financial or critical successes, at least not enough to kind of get the studios out of these different situations. But then all it takes is a couple of films to really kind of spark some light into it all. So you have films like The Godfather and Love Story, these films that are just hugely successful, that really kind of get people going again. You look at like the last of the dying films from that time, films like Funny Girl, which are just, I've not seen, but kind of reeks of that mid '60s sort of spending too much money on these films, and it's like films that were, it's like they wanted to tiptoe the line of being provocative and being adult, but they didn't want to quite do it. I think of well, I don't want to dog on any films, so I guess I'll get off that topic right there. But speaking of actually, one thing I wanted to mention before I ended this episode was I wanted to recommend on YouTube. This from a longer form podcast, but somebody uploaded this clip. I think it's behind a paywall, but somebody uploaded this clip of Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avery on Bret Easton Ellis' podcast, and Quentin Tarantino discussing his positive reaction to Joker, Folie, Deux. Whereas Bret Easton Ellis, I get the idea, was not as much of a fan of, and Roger Avery is far more critical of. But it's fascinating, and I really respect what Tarantino is saying. That's what I was talking about before with Megalopolis a little while ago, is when that film came out. And we're getting a lot of like kind of noise, a lot of just not even any real kind of unique criticism. It was a lot of just like the worst film of the year, worst film of the year, worst film of the year. And then next week, the week after, Joker Folie Deux came out, and that's all you hear: worst film of the year, worst film of the year. And I'm thinking, well, that statement starts to kind of lose its power when every film that is divisive suddenly becomes the worst film of the year. I have my problems with Megalopolis and Joker Folie Deux, but I think both of those are far more interesting films than the majority of kind of some of the Hollywood studio fare that has been released. And yes, these are both studio films. Well, Megalopolis independently made, picked up by Lionsgate, so I guess it is a studio film. But Joker Folie Deux is very much a studio film. But these films I find incredibly more interesting. With the risks that they're taking, the strange turns they decide to do, than just a legacy sequel or another superhero film, or and those are, I'm not throwing shade at those. I'm just saying that I think films like these are a bit more ripe for discussion than well, I'm not going to give any movie names, but you can probably think of some this year that are very disposable. But it's a fascinating conversation. I think even if you're not a fan of the film, I always just love hearing Tarantino's points. He's a very, very smart guy. Even if I don't agree with all of his points sometimes, he's one of these guys I just love hearing what he has to say about these films, love hearing his perspective. And what he does is what I always think a lot of people subconsciously don't do, is he is not concerned with the public milieu, the public reaction to a film. He's willing to kind of have his own opinion and his own unique opinion, not in the way of intentionally being contrarian to others, but in a way where it feels far more nuanced than if 100 people say a film is bad, then now that film is a joke, and now everybody says, oh, I don't like this film either. And you have to question whether or not that's a societal sort of subconscious reaction where everyone says a film is bad, so therefore you have to say it's bad as well. I think people kind of fall into that trapping very easily, and after the reactions of Megalopolis and Joker Folie Deux, that point is just as relevant as ever. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. My throat is incredibly dry right now. This daylight savings is really kind of kicking my butt, so I'm going to try to get with it. But I hope you guys have enjoyed. Make sure you're working on your art, on your creative endeavors, because they're not going to get done themselves. You got to be really headstrong about that. Okay, thank you guys so much for listening. Take care.